Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Women Talking Money podcast. I'm Gretchen from Magenta Financial Planning and She Finance, and today I'm thrilled to welcome Sarah Kirkpatrick to the show. Sarah is the Chief Executive of Welsh Women's Aid, where she has led the team since early 2020, guiding specialist services across Wales through unprecedented challenges, including the pandemic and national lockdowns. Always using an intersectional feminist approach, Sarah has worked across community and criminal justice settings, starting her career supporting women in refuge and working with a wide range of clients affected by domestic abuse. Today, we'll be talking with Sarah about her own experiences with money, the lessons she's learned, the challenges she's faced, and how she's approached financial decisions in her life and also work and business. So welcome, and thank you so much for being willing to join me today.
Delighted to be here. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk to you.
Excellent. Well, we know one another a little bit from our work that we've been doing together with sort of She Finance and the Welsh Women's Aid. But can you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your career journey so far that's led you to where you are now?
A little bit about... Yes, I can. I've been working around specifically domestic abuse, but also more broadly violence against women and girls for over 30 years. But it's not where my career started. Hilariously, my working career as a teenage mum, when I first got into the workplace, I started working the benefits agency. Because having been a teenage mum on a very low income, I'd had some really miserable experiences claiming benefits. It's not fun. And I genuinely thought to myself, if only the workforce had been more lovely, it would have been an easier journey. And I like to imagine myself to be a lovely person. So that was sort of that was how I stepped into the world of work, was working in the benefits agency, helping people at a really difficult time in their lives. I have to be honest and say, it wasn't necessarily the place for me. I think that social security, having a financial safety net for people is hugely important, but also it was incredibly bureaucratic, and there are hard edges about when you're saying no to people, however difficult their situations are. And so I found that really hard, but that gave me an awful lot of skills, which I've brought with me into work supporting survivors. Because I think one of the things that I learned really early on is that when you're in a TIS, even simple things aren't simple anymore. So when you're upset, a 14-page form that you've never seen before feels like the hardest thing in the world. But for me, I'm not upset, and I filled this 14-page form in 100 times before. I could do it with my eyes shut. I could do it in pencil. I could do it quickly. So for me, it really taught me how information is power, but also all of us, when we are in distress, struggle to do even simple tasks. That's sort of been my career, is helping people navigate those really difficult moments, and also understanding that actually all of us, when we are in difficult moments, find life really, really challenging, even simple things. How do we make complex things simple and clear for people? And how do we recognise that when it's people need a hand, it doesn't mean they're incompetent?
And I think that's why, actually, when we've been talking about a variety of things over the last couple of months, like the messaging I have as well is like, how do we make this clearer for people? How do we signpost people with their finances? How do we try and break it down? How do we make things easier? And I think, I completely resonate with that and the messaging that you've got around that with Welsh Women's Aid as well, and why, what you've just talked about. Yeah.
I think it's one of the things that when I first started talking to you that got me really excited is that idea about what you don't know, but actually by being informed, you're more able to make good decisions, good choices, because having something laid out simple and clear. So, I mean, you and I have talked about the She Finance book, and that, trying to get it back off of my aged relative is still a challenge. Because she thinks it's so brilliant and just keeps waving it at me saying, if only this had been around when I was a young woman. And I mean, that particularly delights me because it is so simple and clear.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. It's nice to have the feedback, and we've talked about that before. So thank you. Thanks for sharing that around your journey, because I think it's really good for people to understand, what gives you, what drives you in your career as well. So one of the questions that I ask pretty much everyone who comes on the podcast now is around memories of money, earliest memories. So what's your earliest memory of money? And reflecting on that, how do you think it's shaped your views as you've progressed through life?
This was one of the questions that you gave me in advance. So I had an opportunity to have a bit of a think about this in terms of money. And I have to talk about my mum a bit. So I was raised in a single parent household, and my mum bought her first house when I was about 5. So very young. And I remember conversations about mortgages and budgeting really, really early. And I still remember, and when I sort of look at a calendar, I think, oh, I literally know when that is. I remember her talking about the interest rate hitting 15%, not really being entirely certain what that was. And I think I was sort of around the 10 at that point. But at the same time, understanding how important it was that, she was keeping the books balanced, that she earned and that she had to pay, and that whole pay the bills before you fritter. And it wasn't until I became an adult and I met other people who didn't have that notion of financial competence that I realised how unusual it was. I presumed that financial competence was something everybody could have. So because there was only my mum, and she balanced the books and she would talk to me about balancing the books, I assumed that's what everybody did. So it was a bit of a surprise to me when I sort of hit adulthood, and some people would be like, oh, I don't do that, my husband does that. Or my dad did that, my mum doesn't know anything about mortgages. Because I was like, I assumed everybody knew about that because it was in the DNA of our house.
Yeah, and she had to do it.
She had to do it. You balance the books because you have to balance the books if you want to have fun outings in the summer holidays. You cannot fritter all the times that I would have said, let's go and fritter on this. Yeah, so we think that you can was the lesson that I took. And that there was no doubt about that for me. I guess the other lesson that I took is pay your bills first. That was a big one.
Yeah. And it's really interesting, isn't it, that then as a young child of a single mother who had to do all that herself. Yeah. And I have interviewed actually another person in a similar situation. I do think, single families are very different from a couple family, and where parents remain together, where everyone still adopts quite traditional roles. You share responsibilities, maybe. Yes, that your mum had to get on with it. I imagine she also had to worry a little bit more because of the time it was when she did it, and that it was a 15% interest rate. So she really had to make sure that the money was straight. And I think it's such a great message that you grew up just thinking everyone, I know how to do this. I can do this. And, they should be normal.
I think that was the thing, because what you're raised with, that is normal, isn't it? So it wasn't till, one of the things that it didn't teach me is how to share. Because of course I'm in that headspace of I must be able to do all of the things. So the idea of shared finances makes me feel really unsafe. There always has to be some separation. There has to be the ability to retain an autonomy.
I guess that is also a little bit related to the reality of your job and the nature of difficulties, coercion, abuse that you see with women and how it impacts their finances as well.
Definitely. From very early days working in a women's refuge, meeting people who were moving into a house, they had no idea what they were going to approach. When we would sit down and sort of look at what challenges are we going to face, seeing how many of them had significant amounts of coerced debt, but also had been trapped by money, by having no independent income and having their finances monitored. So yeah, I saw money being used as a tool of oppression almost. And I continue to see that and hear that from colleagues. And I think we articulate it better today in 2026 than we did back when I started in the early 90s. But the problem was there already. And yes, certainly it also is something that I've seen through my career. So probably leaves me with a little bit of an echo in my real life.
Absolutely. And when we're thinking about the fact that actually what you said earlier was that when people are in a panic, when they are in a difficult position, they struggle with even the basics that actually, had we not been under pressure mentally or physically, we would have been able to handle. Can you think of a when you've ever faced sort of a financial challenge, like either redundancy or divorce or bereavement are the usual ones, that sort of has taught you more resilience in the way that you handle things?
I think, yes, possibly. I mean, there was a time when in close succession, I experienced a bereavement and then, unfortunately, significant house fire.
Goodness, okay.
Yeah. I mean, there was partly, well done me for having some house insurance, which in my very early teenage daft days, I didn't have any house insurance, and that would have been a total disaster. But I think there was a moment where I was recently bereaved and then had,
another trauma on top. Yeah.
top. And the decision making was nigh on impossible, because it was very urgent. It was like in the moment. And I think there was some really poor decision making on my part, simply because there was money in the bank. And so I was all right to solve problems very instantly. And I think I would have done things very differently if I'd had time to reflect, or if I hadn't suffered the bereavement and then at the same time, I probably have made very different decisions. But yeah, that sort of brought me up short because I was very rash. I didn't think it through. That made life tricky. I think it's interesting because when you asked me the question, I was thinking about a time when there's been real financial problems. You said about bereavement or possibly redundancy. And it's like, I actually have been made redundant, but I thought that through and was fine, because I took voluntary redundancy, knew what was happening. I was very careful and planned. I didn't think, yay, time to splurge. So actually, the time that had a really significant financial impact on me was when I was emotionally all over the place. 2 disasters on top of each other and terrible decision making, actually, from a place of affluence rather than a place of poverty. When I am in a place of tight budgets, I was raised to be very, very cautious. Yeah. The one time I was not very, very cautious was when I wasn't.
Maybe felt a bit freer financially. And then, and also both of those incidents that both of those traumas are uncontrolled. Completely. You don't have any control over them. When the redundancy one is interesting, because I think if it's a planned voluntary kind of, you've had time. I mean, I work with clients where there's a potential voluntary, and we can talk about the options, and you can weigh up your pros and cons, how much you would be able to, need to survive, for XYZ months while you look for other things. And you can, as you say, sort of use your understanding and knowledge to make that position more in your control. When, if it's a redundancy which unexpected, or also all of the other traumas that we've talked about, a divorce that completely catches you off guard and you had no idea that was what was happening.
Yeah.
And that was going to happen. Or as you said, bereavement. I think those things are it's the control factor, isn't it? The ability to apply our logic.
Yes. And the feeling in control, or the feeling of being blindsided, that just takes you out because you're still being breathless. I was still breathless from the bereavement at the point where the house fire. And then it was like, I was overwhelmed by those things. I couldn't be thoughtful and systematic, even about stuff that on a regular day, I could be thoughtful and systematic. And I think in the same way, if voluntary redundancy allows you to think about things more clearly and calmly, because you've been able to anticipate it, perhaps.
Interesting. When we think about your work with women and sort of, I guess, we've talked before about how so many women that we come across in both of our roles sort of do struggle with managing to keep an independent fund or keep, separate finances, and then are in a position where they don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Can you, and given your experience from your mum of being, strongly independent and being brought up like that and everything that you've experienced, do you think there's anything that, if someone's listening right now thinking, I do not have a clue, or I'm not under control, or I'm in a position where I don't know what to do, where do you guide people to start when you're in both Welsh Women's Aid and in the past when you've been helping people?
I guess I would start with prevention, in that I'm going to make the assumption that the person who's listening to me is thinking, actually, I don't have any need for financial separation. There is, no financial oppression in my household. It's fine. So, because I think there's something about when you're in a tricky place, when you think, I think that I'm being financially controlled, or I think that I can't access funds, we're already starting up that road of tricky. So I'm going to start from a place of prevention and say, actually, the romantic fairy tale tells us that everything is supposed to be shared, but that should be decisions are also shared, and having some level of financial autonomy is not a negative judgment on a partnership. So I think, a good and healthy relationship is one where we talk about money and that we both have a level of financial autonomy, and that's not a negative judgment on the relationship. It's not a running away fund. It's everybody needs autonomy. How can two people be two grown-ups, equals and equal players in the game, if they are not able to be financially autonomous? So I think I start from that place of prevention, of we should all be able to stand on our own 2 feet and pay our bills, and know how to do that. Even if you then choose to have shared accounts, you should know how to do it. You should know how to set up a direct debit in the same way as you should know how to wire a plug or sew on a button,
And what I think's really interesting is that what I've experienced in the role that I'm in is that actually at the start of a relationship, an awful lot of women, especially in our generation, were completely savvy because they met their husband a little bit later on, or they had a job, they had a career, and then they had children. And actually, early on in the relationship, they did know how to do everything because they'd maybe lived independently before, owned a house maybe. But then what happens is that the traditional stereotype roles slide in, and suddenly you're 20 years down the line and you don't know how to do them because the traditional roles have led to you doing one of those paths and maybe your partner doing the other. And so I think what's really important, and just to add to what you're saying, is when you've started it, continue it. And so set a date, right? So working with a financial planner, for example, is great because we see one another once a year and we're going to say to you, how are things? And we're going to talk about the money. But if you don't have a financial advisor or a financial planner, then set yourself that time. And we talk a bit about that in the book, about money dates and setting time to kind of sit down and go through things. It doesn't have to be monthly. God, I can't even imagine anything worse. Just to do it so that you've reminded everyone is still equal and knows what's going on, rather than just at the start when everyone's set good intentions.
I really like that, because I think that's sort of that gradual erosion of skills. I haven't used it for so long, I've forgotten how to do it. I haven't used it for so long and somebody's told me I can't do it. Those two things aren't so far apart, are they? Is it lack of practice, or has somebody undermined me?
And is it, for example, well, there was a better banking rate over here, so I moved everything to here, but now you're not on the account, or you are on the account, but you suddenly haven't got a PIN or access for that anymore. And now, especially with digital, how fast things are. I mean, we don't do anything in paper. You don't have to necessarily even have to sign anything to change things, it's in paper anyway. So I think, for me, it would be adding on is like, how regularly, are you reminding yourself of these things? And we've seen that. Where
I do genuinely think that is such a sensible idea of like a regular review, because again, it's not a critique, that actually checking and refreshing, and also not when we're having a financial crisis. You shouldn't only check your finances when you think you've overspent.
Yeah, and it's not about you spent this, I spent that. And also I think it's, yes, not in crisis, a specific time for that. So you're not trying to do like multiple things and also talk about the banking, like that's not going to work. And I do think it's really, really, really important. So it's great that it came up with your answer as well. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess a little bit back to you because I want to sort of understand a little bit more about your experiences with money. And this is quite an interesting question. So if you can think about one joyful or empowering financial moment that you'll never forget.
Oh, wow. Has got to be when my premium bond came in. I'm not entirely certain that premium bonds are the best investment in the history ever.
Oh, no.
Are they the one that we don't recommend? I love my premium bonds. I've won once, ever.
Okay.
Ever.
And was it a large payout, Sarah? Please tell me.
You think it was 25 whole pounds.
That's why they're not a good investment in the time you've had them.
Well, but it was the most joy ever because it came in. I was so excited. And I almost didn't cash the check because I wanted to keep the check because I was so ridiculously excited. I continue to look at the 2 premium bonds that were bought for me when I was born. And they were bought in D because I am pre-decimal. They've never won. So no. I have some modern premium bonds that obviously, as I say, have won just the once ever. But I have these 2. And that must have been quite a substantial amount of money that was put down for me as a tiny baby. They are exactly the same value that they were. So no, they're probably not the best investment in the world, but they haven't gone down.
They haven't gone down.
Just
and there
the
is
world
something
has gone up.
Psychologically, and I get why you've chosen it as an example because clients all the time say, oh, but I love it, I like it feels like a bit of a bit of a flutter, and then I actually win quite a lot, but actually when you add it all up and I do with my financial planning hat on, it's actually not that great an investment. But I do see the appeal of winning and how that makes you feel, because if you get money that you're not expecting, that's always going to make you feel pretty good.
Yes. And I resist the lottery because so I'm not a big fan of gambling because it always feels like the economics of desperation. So I don't mind. I mean, I talk to people who go to the races and where you might win, but it's you're not doing it because you need to win. But I do know people, and when I worked in the refuge, often people would be like, I'm going to buy a lottery ticket. That will solve all the problems. I just need to win the lottery. I'm just holding my breath. I need to win the lottery. And it's like, yep, it's not the best plan ever had. Because it's that economics of desperation. And I think that I see that. I also see, I'm going off at a tiny tangent.
That's okay.
Payday loans. You see, my mum used to talk about 15% interest. Payday loans are way beyond that in terms of interest rates, aren't they? And what I see is that when someone is in a financially difficult situation and the only thing that they can think about is a windfall, or the only thing that they can think about is, I need a really small amount of money to get me through this really difficult patch, and that the interest rate is criminally crippling, or the odds of you winning the lottery and bazillions of pounds is really, really low. That feels like an uncomfortable part of our relationship with money, because actually the thing about the premium bonds is I don't need to cash them in. My 2 little pound premium bonds that have been there since 1960, can't remember. It's a treat when they win.
If you keep those for long enough, Sarah, maybe the certificates themselves will be worth more.
They asked me to send them back and I will not send them back. No, I know they're like an antique. They are. But that's a treat, isn't it? If it wins, it's a treat. £25 was not going to change my life, but I don't watch like a hawk on my premium bonds. But it reminds me that actually I don't want to be in a place where the only thing that can save me is magic or a windfall. So Yeah, so I don't gamble very much. I think, do premium bonds count as gambling?
No, they're not. But I always say, the clients who they like the unknown kind of, am I going to get anything moment.
I'm glad it's not just me. But yeah, sometimes I look at it and I think this is the economics of desperation, and it preys on people in a way that I don't really like.
Yeah. And the reality is that, in that situation, it's a desperation is the word, right? Of what am I going to be able to do? And that's why knowing where resources are that can help you, and, getting guidance from either yourselves and support from other facilities that are around in desperation, rather than trying to take it all on and make all those decisions yourself, is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that sort of careful planning, like little pots. My mum was hilarious. She saved 20 pences and then she would buy specific things. So that would be like, there was the 20 pence stool, and people would think that the stool cost 20 pence. The stool did not cost 20 pence.
But she'd saved so much in 20 pences, yeah.
Yeah, so she would have these things and you have those dedicated pots that feel symbolic, and you set them aside.
And nowadays, of course, there are so many good resources to do that. So, I mean, there are plenty of banks out there that do this, but the Starling Bank app, for example, is great because, you can do your roll up. So let's say, it didn't cost you £3, it cost you £2.90, your 10p will go over to somewhere else straight away. You can have your little pot set up so that you can start your emergency fund and your kind of like, stool NEP fund or whatever it is that you want. And regularly tracking that is just so important if you are in a position to be able to save the 20p's, and start somewhere. And those apps are brilliant for that. They're just like the pot that you had in your kitchen. It's digital rather than.
Yeah. And I do think those things are clever, because you don't have to save a huge pile of money. And I think that was one of the things that I learned, was that whole saving makes it feel more worthwhile, but also thinking about it, being careful, not just at a certain point tipping it back into the household budget.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. And what about, this kind of overlaps a little bit with what we've already talked about, but the question I wanted to ask was, what's the most unexpected lesson that money has taught you?
Gosh, that it can't buy happiness.
If that sounds like a card of some kind, a greetings card of some kind.
I do my best.
But no, I absolutely agree. And I'm sure many, many people will.
I guess in my own life, but also in my professional life. And I guess this is where the moment where I sort of talk about work and say, I think sometimes I met a lot of people I've met in frontline services, people who've been really desperately financially harmed, who have someone who is simply taking all of their money and not financially contributing. I've encountered people with coerced debt. But I've also met people who were surprisingly solvent, who were just as trapped by the money. And it was used in a different way, but it was still used to keep them trapped. And in my own life, there have been moments where I was not so solvent. I was a teenage mum, and now I have a full-time job and the children have grown up and are marginally less expensive. But actually, it's the other things. It's the taking time to smell the flowers and having a sense of freedom that is what makes life brighter. Not having a bank balance in the red means I don't have sleepless nights, but it doesn't really change how black the bank balance is as to whether I can find joy in the world.
There's a really interesting statistic or like information out there that you might have heard me say before on something, which is around how much money, like when you no longer need to work, how much money retirees as such require to lead a happy retirement.
Yes, go on.
And I can't remember the figures off the top of my head, but there's a point where it gets to actually, it didn't matter if you had more than that much money. Mm-hmm. You weren't any happier and you didn't have any better quality of life, and you didn't, feel that you were, any better off, emotionally. And so there is a peak. So it doesn't, you're right, yes, we don't want to be in the red because that makes us sleepless nights and doesn't feel good. And of course, we ideally want to be solvent and be able to do some nice things and be able to, enjoy life. But there is a point where that how much you need to be happy there's a bit where it gets actually, I'm no happier after that point.
Yeah.
And I find that all that kind of thing really fascinating.
Yeah. I find that fascinating, but you did mention pensions. And so I have to say, one of the things for me, and I think talking to you really brought it home actually, is being solvent in the now and being in the black in the now is jolly important and sensible. But thinking about my golden years and thinking about, will I be comfortable then? Premium bonds definitely not going to be helping me on that one. So I think that idea about financial competence, being informed, knowing that I can do money, that was definitely a gift from my mum that I never knew was a gift. I just thought it was like, of course you can do money. Everyone can do money. But I think it is really important that actually money isn't just in the now. It's also about making sure you've got a safety net. Years ago, when my car broke down, I'd have to figure out how I was going to have to pay for it. Now not only do I have fully comprehensive car insurance, there is a little pot that the just in case money goes into for the car, just in case something awful happens. And I think those, the future planning reduces my sleepless nights.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned earlier about freedom. So what do you think living your best financially free life looks like?
I definitely give a much more sensible answer, a much more boring answer than I would have done in my teens, because it is not buying every last thing that I fancy. What does financial freedom mean? It means being able to sleep at night and know that I can do the things that I need to do and do the things that I want to do, and that reckless spending doesn't get me anywhere. But being able to have a holiday if I want one, treat the kids if I want one, fix the car if it breaks down, that feels like freedom.
Yeah, and it's different for everyone. I love that question because I get different answers every time. And so just as we wind up, I'd like one piece of money wisdom you'd like every woman listening to take away today.
Know that you can. And know that you can in advance. I think if you know how to do something already, so before you need it, know how to fill in those forms, know how to ask questions. So it always feels, am I allowed to take a moment or two to do my really long, ridiculous example?
Sure.
If you buy something from the shop and it doesn't work, I say to people, what would you do? And everyone knows their statutory rights. Everyone knows you take it back to the shop and they give you a refund. We should know how to deal with our accounts, how to talk about money, how to claim the money that we are entitled to. And we should not have to wait until a crisis to look for it. Be informed already. In the same way as we know our statutory rights, we should know how money works and what it can do for us. We should understand what interest rates do to us. If you borrow a fiver and you have to pay back 50 quid, that's not okay. So that thing about understanding, being informed before you're in a crisis is so important. That was very long-winded. I'm so sorry.
No, absolutely. So we are out of time though. So before we just sign off, can you let everyone know where they can find out more about the work that you do at Welsh Women's Aid?
I certainly can. So Welsh Women's Aid is the membership organisation for all forms of violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence across Wales. We have members all across Wales that provide frontline help and support. And you can find that on our website. And I believe that you're going to put a link to the website. But also the Live Fear Free helpline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's a bilingual helpline. And I believe you're going to put the phone number in the chat rather than me.
Yeah, we'll put it below the show notes. Yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
you so much. And I think it's really important that sometimes people aren't quite sure if they're experiencing financial oppression, or they're not quite sure where to turn for help in terms of domestic abuse or sexual violence. Live Fear Free helpline can talk to people who are unsure just as much as it can talk to people who are sure and definitely need an exit. And on our website and via the Live Fear Free helpline, we can connect you with local specialist services so that they can provide one-to-one support in your area, wherever your area might be.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute joy.